gone is the day when you can kind of, okay, try really hard, do a good job, and get into Stanford. If you don't have certain criteria, you're not going to be able to get in to Stanford or to Berkeley, to Brown, to Harvard, to Princeton. And we have an obligation, I think, to give students the educational environment so that they can access those those high institutions. But to the issue of stress, I think it's a great question. And we need to spend some time on that. We need to look at when is it enough? And I think that goes back to your point about, are there adults on the campus who are really watching the kids to make sure that they're okay? Are the kids all right? And if kind of the level of stress that we're talking about, we need to balance it off with that interpersonal relationship to kind of keep track of kids. So I get why you're asking it. It's a good, and it's a very good question. It's a thoughtful question, and it's one that we won't ever get just one right answer to and say, okay, now it's all fine. We need to constantly monitor that. So thanks for asking.
Any more questions? Any more?
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, hold on.
Dr. Collins, what's your advice to the parents to prepare kids for college?
Yeah.
And another question is that what can parents do to make the teacher job easier?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Preparing kids for college. I think I'll kind of answer that first of all from a personal experience. My wife and I have 3 kids, as I mentioned, and it's amazing that they're grown up. But they were once all high school students or middle school students, and they're 3 different kids. One of our children, our oldest, has some kind of typical firstborn tendencies, so very hardworking. She's the one who said, kind of throw those hard classes at me, give them to get, I'll take them. And she was very self-motivated. So she did not need a lot of pushing by us, her parents. She pushed herself. And she had specific goals in mind. And she had specific colleges in mind. So what we tried to do was listen to her and get a sense of what her interests were, what kinds of classes she liked. She tended to like math classes, and she tended to like figuring things out, and she tends to be very competitive. And so she worked very hard to be that straight A kind of student. And she picked a college, or the college that she ended up attending is in the Midwest, it's Notre Dame. And she had a great high school, or great college experience, and that led to graduate school. And she's 28 now and doing very well. So that we could almost sit back and just let her go. Our son was not so interested in getting straight A's, and he didn't like math much at all. So we had more conversations about, well, what do you like? And he happened to like student activities. He wanted to run for office. He wanted to be involved in ASB. It's what it's called at our kids' high school. So we supported him in that. And we asked him those questions about, what kinds of activities would you be interested in? And we had to push him a little bit. And we told him in our own way what was acceptable in our mind and what wasn't, and that he needed to pay attention to that. He found a school in Boston that didn't push math at all. It's a little college called Emerson, and he did very well, and he will now be going to law school. But the 2 children are very different. Our 3rd child, Kelsey, is our youngest, and she just graduated from USC last year. And she was kind of a combination of the 2 of them. She didn't work as hard probably as her older sister, but maybe a little more motivated than her brother. And so she ended up kind of pushing the academics and the activities. One of the things that perhaps we didn't do, that we could have done, was to emphasize their musical talents They showed some musical talent, and we sent them to lessons, but we probably could have done more with that. So I would say part of the answer to your question is to listen to your child and their interests. I have a tendency as a dad to tell my child what they should like to do. And in reality, as they grow up, they have a pretty good idea of what they like or don't like to do. So, so that conversation, I would say it's important to stay connected, to keep an ongoing conversation with your kids. That's important. When the time comes, as they get older, it's fun to explore colleges. You might want to combine family vacations with college tours. Any big city has a college. So you go up to visit San Francisco and you go by Stanford or Berkeley. You just here in LA, you can go to a number of colleges just as a family trip. So have them be thinking about it. But also, what we needed to do was figure out when we pushed them enough, and they needed to kind of sort out where they wanted to go. So expose them, get to know them well, expose them to the culture of college, and then save a lot of money. Because you'll need to do that too.
Okay, question over here, please.
Yes, do you mind update some budgeting on high school issue?
On updating on the high school,
Yeah, right.
in terms of the construction.
Correct. Any updated budget issue?
Okay. The bond, we've just approved the last board meeting last week. The green light to sell more bonds. Projects S and Y were passed in this area by the community a couple of years ago. And that allowed for the selling of about $80 million worth of bonds. The first round of bonds were sold a couple of years ago, and then construction was initiated on a number of campuses. Most of that, a lot of that money has actually been used. So now we're going into the next phase. So we'll be selling more bonds, and we have a number of projects that will be breaking ground this summer. The project that we're most interested in right now is the pool at Dunbar High School. If you visit Dunbar High School, you'll note that there's a road that's been built, and that's an emergency road that you need to have when you have a pool. You'll note, it's hard to see, but there's a pump that's all ready. We have the water, it's all set to go up to where the pool will be. Excuse me, we brought in the power, so we've increased the power at the school to be ready for that pool. So we've got all of those things going. And we intend to break ground on that pool this summer. And my goal, keep my fingers crossed, is that pool would be, what do they call it? Dive ready, I think is the phrase that one of the board members uses. Or dive in, the dive-in date. The dive-in date we're shooting for is September, not next September, but the following September. We want to get going on that pool. That's an important project. So we're moving along with the bond. We're pushing that. We're actually speeding things up a little bit. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
I have what you said about Mandarin immersion sounded really interesting. I was wondering if you're going to expand it to other grades, and if you have like...
Yeah, it's part of a FLAP grant, a foreign language grant that we have, and we would like to expand it. We would like to write another grant to get that. We think that's important. That's relatively new, so we're going to watch it carefully, but clearly in this school district, the idea of paying attention to a dual immersion kind of program is one that we're paying a lot of attention to. Another thing that we're looking at, and it's sort of related but not, is we're investigating what would kind of be called an international academy. And that has to do with students who are not residents of this country, who might be able to obtain a visa to come to this country for a year to study. And there are a lot of rules around that, and there are a lot of technicalities. It's called an F1 or I-20 is the I-20 is the kind of status, It involves a student from another country who wants to come to this country and experience a high school for 1 year. And there aren't a lot of school districts that are pursuing this, but kind of in the name of innovation, in the name of being an international school district, we are interested in that. So we continue to look at pushing against kind of typical ways of doing school and seeing if there's another way. It might be interesting to have an international academy in our district that where we invited students from other countries to come study for a year. And they would learn English and probably also spend some time on our comprehensive high school campuses. We're working on that. We're looking at the pros and cons to that. We would probably start off slowly, but it's an idea that it's kind of technical and legal. They can only come for a year at a time. But we're checking it out. We're learning more about it. So the international piece, the learning more than one language, all the research says that if you want your children to learn a second or third language, the earlier the better. So we're trying to tie all that in. It's fun to go to a school like C.J. Morris where you hear kids speaking at times Mandarin, at times Spanish, and as well as English. It's fun.
Okay, any more questions? Oh,
I have two more questions. The first question is, it seems like most of the money is in federal. I know a lot of people know California is basically poor and don't have too much money. Do we have any working for us looking at the federal level? Like, is there any fund?
Yeah. Another good question. The answer is actually most of our money comes from the state. Most of our money does come from California. So one of the reasons that we say we're watching the budget, although it's not the main thing. Kids are the main thing. But what happens in Sacramento directly impacts Walnut Valley Unified School District. In fact, we're what's called a low wealth district. That means that we get, it's complicated, but our funding per student is actually lower than a number of surrounding districts. We don't get as much federal money. The federal money is more tied to the number of kids that you have. Oh, thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you very much. Thank you. The federal money is typically tied to kids who are low socioeconomically, and we don't have a lot of low socioeconomic kids. The federal government steps in typically in that area. So we rely on the state for the vast majority of our money.
Is FLAP program funded by federal or state?
The FLAP program?
Uh-huh.
The FLAP is, I believe the FLAP grant is a federal grant. So that's a specific grant that you write, and you ask for the federal government to support the idea. And we've written 4 of them in this district so far.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is there any other federal grant like that we can apply to for maybe like science or math? Or
Yeah, in fact, we are looking at bringing on, it would be through a consultant basis, but a person who would help us with grants and help us with development, fundraisers. We think that's, if the state's going to cut us back more and more, we need to be creative with how we can generate money. So we're trying to figure out how to do that and how to do that well. La Cañada recently stepped forward, and La Cañada is a fairly small and very affluent school district, and they asked their families to contribute $2,500 each to help the school district run. Interesting idea. We haven't done that, but other school districts do that. And it comes down to that whole idea of we are extraordinary. We don't want to become ordinary. So how do we make